Hello everybody, hello live audience. Welcome to this course on managing the risk of corruption and fraud in your organisation. My name's Nigel Iyer and I hope you're going to enjoy this. We've got a live audience here, so you might hear a bit of shouting and murmuring and heckling in the background. Please feel free to join in from wherever you are. What we're going to cover is in three parts. We're going to demystify what corruption and fraud is. A lot of you might have read about it in the newspapers. You might have even read boring, dull books on compliance with rules and procedures. We're actually going to look at something different. How it's done, who does it, and why. Then we're going to turn to the business case for making money because you're losing it. Or should I say it more clearly, one of the best ways of making money is to stop losing it. And as the part three, how you can go about doing that. The real motto of this course is prevention is better than cure. Just like a regular health check with your doctor might save you surgery at a later date and a rather heavy bill. My background is years ago, while I wanted to be an artist, I ended up becoming a chartered accountant. I found it a very exciting profession, even though I wanted at that time to join the police to stop corruption. I found being an external auditor in one of the big 8 firms at the time extremely fascinating, because you could go into large companies, look through some of the details and find incredible things: offshore payments, bribes, kickbacks, overcharging. You could find all of that. The problem was, in the audit profession in the 80s, it wasn't popular for junior auditors to find that sort of stuff at their clients. As we saw with the Enron case, it was still not popular about 15 years later. So I left. After I qualified as a chartered accountant, I left, started working full-time investigating and preventing corruption and fraud in a large oil company. And after that, I became an investigator, traveling the world, quite remote places, investigating corruption, fraud in large corporations. And many people, maybe senior people, did lose their job as an effect of it. However, I noticed about 8 years ago that companies were spending a lot when they had a problem, but not enough to prevent the problem from occurring in the first place. And that really did lead me into a new world where fraud and corruption risk management was really all about awareness and prevention. If you're aware of the problem, you're keen to prevent it. Most companies are not as aware as they should be. Towards the end of my last few years, I've started writing. I've written a novel about corruption and fraud, and I'm writing film scripts, some of which you will be able to see in these versions of expert lectures. So let's carry on from what we talked about with film scripts. Many companies, they spend a lot of time on rules and regulations. They decide policies for their corporate responsibility, which includes anti-corruption. They decide about how they're going to avoid child labour. They produce beautiful looking brochures. And at the same time, the finance guys and the board are looking at procedures for corporate governance, internal control. And these things have been developing over the last 20 years quite rapidly, usually triggered by a fraud and corruption scandal. For example, codes of conduct became very popular after the crash of BCCI. For example, after Enron, WorldCom, and many of the other things which were triggered possibly due to the crash of the US economy after 9/11, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act came into practice. And because of widespread bribery and corruption all over the world, the UN, with its arm called the UN Global Compact, set up a 10th principle of anti-corruption. And it's very funny that all the regulation, legislation, and guidelines, vast volumes of it, come into place after the events. Now, what is the regulation and legislation? It's paper. Paper and rules. And whether it be Maxwell in the old days, whether it be Madoff more recently, or MPs, pieces of paper and rule books do not stop people committing corruption and doing fraud. It just doesn't work. Rule books and guidelines tend to work quite well for the honest, diligent people, not the fraudsters or the people who have already turned to the dark side. And what we have to actually understand is, and this is my little prop for this lecture, is just remember this, that the dark side, as they said in the first Star Wars, is within each and every one of us. And we might actually do a little experiment on that a bit later on when you're feeling a bit more comfortable. So, there is another side of the coin, and we're going to take that little trip now as a journey to the dark side. And just remember, on the left-hand side, pieces of paper, rule books, do not stop determined criminals. Just like Neville Chamberlain said, I have a piece of paper, and he wasn't able to stop with that piece of paper Adolf Hitler invading Poland. So remember that. Rules and guidelines do not stop fraud. They are a safety net for the honest. What we need to go beyond compliance. We need to develop a mentality. We need to want to do it. And I find it very hard. People who give me lists of rules say you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this, you have to do the washing up. I'll do it. I'll comply, especially if it's my wife who tells me. But I have to, if somebody shows me why it's important, then I want to comply. So I don't think Neville Chamberlain really worked enough with Adolf Hitler's motivation. So already I'm going to ask you guys and ladies a question. The question's this, and no, Tom, I don't want you to answer now. I want you to wait. A typical company, please make up in your mind what you think is typical, has sales, turnover, of, and because some of you are in the European audience, we're doing this in euros, not that Britain's gone over to the euros yet, but we're doing this with a typical company of 100 million euros. And I want you to, each and every, and not to talk, Andy, with each other, to decide on your own. I want your personal meaning on this. I want to know what you think is the typical cost of corruption and fraud every year. And I've got those categories up, 0 to 100,000, 100,000 to 1 million, 1 million to 5 million, and greater than 5 million. And I want you to think on your own this time, please. So, what's the true extent of corruption and fraud? What do we mean? We mean anything that's deliberate and dishonest. Now, accountants and lawyers, they love writing long, long, long definitions that no one can understand. Let's just boil it, reduce it down to deliberate, dishonest. Now, deliberate's easy. I mean, it's quite easy. I think all of us have a pretty good opinion on what deliberate is. But because we're a mixture of ages and cultures in this audience, you might have a different opinion on what's dishonest. And just keep that opinion to yourself. I just want to see what you think. Definitely something which bypasses the rule books and the controls. It's kind of important to realise that, well, first of all, fraudsters do break rules, but also rules aren't perfect. The more rules you have, the more loopholes you tend to expose. Examples: overcharging, conflicts of interest, false claims, false expenses, exaggerated results, kickbacks, the theft. The list can go on forever. But the truth usually is hidden, rules are broken, and very important, when you think about the cost, it's not just the laptop that I just stole from you, Rachel. It's what was on that laptop, the information. The fact that you're going to have a nervous breakdown because you've got some private stuff that you haven't taken a backup. Yeah, you know you haven't taken a backup. And also, it's going to be the fact that you're going to suspect someone because you're in this room, we went for a tea break, and who took it? Well, it must be Tom because he looks like a criminal. So,
Tom did take it.
So there we go. We're out there, we're suspecting people, we're causing noise, we're having to clear it up, we're going to have to bring in the police, maybe some expensive investigators. The indirect costs on the reputation of this place, the indirect costs on the culture, the fact that we've got after work to do, is much more than the value of that pretty cheap laptop you've got, actually. So depreciated value, we're looking at £500, yeah? Okay. So that's the true extent. And also remember another thing. Often when journalists, because they find it easy to focus on the individual inside the company when we're talking about a fraud scandal, well, remember there are many more people involved. I mean, let's just take some examples of expense claims, not naming any particular Houses of Parliament in the world at all. Who were really involved? Well, of course, the people who did it were involved, but what about the people who should have found it? In a way, they were involved as well because they got paid lovely salaries.